Hello there, everybody. My name's Josh Berle. I'm the outgoing chair of Project Inclusion at the Payments Association, and this is the latest in a line of interviews that we're running as part of our cost of living crisis project. Today, I'm very pleased to have with us the founder, CEO of Hi55, David Brown. So, David, over to you just to introduce yourself and your organization.
Hi, Josh. My name's David. I'm the founder of Hi. Hi is a company that's been pioneering the idea of freedom, which is freedom for both pensions and for pay, which is the ability for anyone to access their pay or their pension free of charge, exclusively with Mastercard, and at the same time allow employers the ability for the first time ever to finance their payroll itself.
Great. Okay. Well, we're focused on cost of living, which I know is very, very relevant to the proposition that Hi55, well, the many propositions that Hi55 is offering, as I understand it. Could you talk a little bit about what the cost of living crisis means to you and your organization, and the prime ways in which you believe you might be addressing it?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. I mean, the cost of living crisis is something that is affecting and will affect almost everyone in the world, but in particular we'll talk about the UK, and it's obviously it's in the press now, the pressure, the pain that people are feeling, and more often than not, I don't really see us talking too much about pensioners. We're talking mainly about workforces from what I see in the media, but the reality is the cost of living crisis is affecting all sectors. You know, we've had energy increase. You look at the price of food, mortgages are doubling, trebling. I mean, all of this is pretty much unsustainable for anyone, even with who's good at budgeting. It doesn't matter. No one's budgeted for their mortgage to triple and their energy to double. So this is something that's going to come in and affect everyone in the country. But alongside that, people need to link them both together as inflation as well, because inflation is also having an impact on almost every employer and every pension in the country. And that too is going to create an impact. And you start to see, I think you start to see a lot of job losses, because whilst people are demanding pay increases, at the end of the day, you know, there's only so much money that goes around in the system. So naturally, you know, you start to see people focus on how can I reduce the costs.
Right. So could you talk a little bit about how Hi55 is going to be addressing that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about this in the past with some other bodies, but you know, when we look at the cost of living, what Mastercard and Hi have developed together is the ability for any employee or any pensioner to really see what they're earning on a daily basis rather than end of the month, and allow them through the cost of living crisis to access what is owed to them at any stage they want free of charge. Now, this will help them in a cost of living crisis. It will help them smooth their cash flow. But what it won't do is it will not fix that budget gap that people will meet. You know, it just simply smooths the cash flow, makes life better for them, makes them to be able to pay for that odd bill ahead of the payment day. But there's still going to be pressures at the end of the month on their budget, and that, you know, I forecast that wage inflation would come in. It's already coming in. You can see it in the strikes. You can see it in the papers. People demanding more pay. Are they getting enough more pay? Probably not when you look at the inflation curve itself. So really what we need to do is give them tools to take away that burden and that sharpness of that financial concern that everyone's having of, how am I going to be able to buy food? How am I able to heat my house? You know, and although we help address the solution from a cash flow standpoint, we actually don't fix the problem. The problem's bigger than just improving pay cycles and improving pension cycles.
Would you like to elaborate a little bit further on and provide a bit more colour in respect of the specifics around what Hi55 is doing and how that addresses cost of living challenges for people at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, some things that we can talk about here is some data that was available pre a cost of living crisis. So when this data gets reviewed again, it's going to get even more alarming. But to give you an idea, the figures are basically saying that 50% of the UK workforce would struggle to find £100 if it came to them as a single bill. And something like 75% of the UK would struggle to find £250.
Mm-hmm.
So let's put that in the context. So all it requires is £100 to put someone under significant financial pressure,
mm-hmm.
financial duress, and the harm that does to them is actually quite big.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a small amount of money. So it's only and that was before we had cost of living, right? So if you review these figures again, I think they're going to get more alarming.
Yeah.
And really, you know, what I've been saying, but isn't it mad to put someone under pressure for £100 when you owe them £1,000 in wages? You know, it doesn't make sense, because you, the employer, now have a very unproductive employee or a very unhappy pensioner because they got a parking ticket. Because that's what we're talking about here. A parking ticket can create financial duress. And isn't it better to allow them tools to basically pay for that parking ticket by accessing something that you actually owe them, and really, you know, take away that pain? And one of the discussions we get is about budgeting, and how will people budget if they get access to their money early? Surely that's going to put them under further financial duress.
Can I ask a question though here, Dave? Because this was a real light bulb moment for me, and I think first of all, you explained it to me previously that, you know, if a given company, an employer, were to go bust, then it's, you know, in day 15 of the month, it's very clear that they owe the employer money, the employee money. He or she is effectively a creditor to the company. Yet, absent that situation, we all have this psychology that actually we're not owed anything until the end of the month, and the same applies to pensions and benefits as well. And this is exactly the point you're making, which is, in actual fact, that organization right from day one of the month is in debt to the employee or the benefit recipient or the pension recipient. And
that is the light bulb moment. So the way I explain it to people sometimes, Josh, is I'm saying, if you were a restaurant and you got a dishwasher in for a shift and he worked 6 hours, and you were unhappy with that dishwasher and you fired them, you legally still need to pay them that 6 hours. And if you don't, and they take you to court, you will lose, because it's irrelevant that you didn't think they were a good dishwasher. What was relevant is they worked 6 hours, and they are legally entitled to that money, because you, as an employer or a pension fund, have a liability for 6 hours now, and the only way you can clear it is to pay it. So when you think about that, and I've been quite controversial, because I've kind of said it's your money. You should be able to accept your money anytime you want. It's not your fault that they can't process the payroll in time. It's their fault that they can't process it. So the reality is, when we look at the overall chain, I'm kind of saying to every pensioner and every employee in the country, there's no need for you to wait every month to be paid. You know, you should demand to be paid every day, because it is your money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite revolutionary, really. So to talk a little bit about the specifics of what Hi55 are doing about that, and what's going to come in the next few months in terms of the products that you're developing.
Yeah, it's not just what we're doing. I think it's a good idea, Josh, to look at where we're going, and some of the sort of FAQs we get from people. And I think one of the most common FAQs that I get is, if you give someone access to their money before payday, they're going to go and spend it and have no money left. And that just goes to show how wired our brain into thinking being paid monthly is okay, right? And when you have a high interest rate coming in, as I often say to people, so are you happy that your employee or your pensioner is paying 10% more for their mortgage? And people say, what do you mean by that? And I'm saying, well, because mortgages are calculated on compounded daily interest. So if you have 30 days compounded daily interest on your mortgage at 5%, you're paying 3 years more for the mortgage term than if you paid it weekly. And it's about unwinding the way we've been thinking, because we've been trained into the way that we pay as the norm. And I'm saying, but that's not the norm. If you go back in time, people used to get paid every week, and actually they were better at budgeting. And by the way, we had less payday lenders in the market then than we do now, because by paying people in a period where they can't budget, you actually create a predatory and payday lending market. You actually create it by default. So it's just saying to people, just think about it, because no one wants 30 days credit. No, Vodafone don't want an arrears department chasing you for 30-day mobile contracts. It's just the way it is today. So if you start to look at true financial well-being should be changing completely how people get paid so that they can determine how they pay for things.
So talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing about that.
Again, we did this in partnership with Mastercard, but what we looked at was two things. One was we looked at what is the right thing to do here. And we came to the conclusion that if you were to give someone access to their property, should you charge them for it? And we came to a view that you shouldn't charge them to it, because we just seen that as unfair. Why charge someone to access something that's theirs? So we took a view that it will and should always be free to the end user, because they're simply accessing something that is already theirs.
Yeah,
that's the first thing we did, was to make sure that this was free. And to do that in partnership with Mastercard, we came to the conclusion was the card is a natural mechanism to deliver that benefit to the end user. Because the card can make it free of charge to the end user, and also provides data that can be used to enhance and create further value as you go through the journey. So when we decided that it wasn't in our interest to send the money to your bank account for several reasons. One is it would just be a money remittance and no one gets any data. And two is, if you were underwater and I sent it to your bank, would you actually get it? No, would it actually get to you, the end user, or would it be consumed because you were massively overdrawn?
Yeah.
So there was some real thinking between Mastercard and Hi how you should deliver that benefit to the pensioner or the employee, and that in turn lays the ground for further well-being products like loyalty and rewards and a whole bunch of stuff that can be delivered through card that can't be delivered through cash. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
are you able to talk a little bit about the pilot that you're running with at the moment? I'm not sure that is something you can talk about openly at this point in time.
No, the pilots were fascinating. So the pilots were to really take away this. Well, there was two pilots, because there is an opinion, because there's a difference. And I try and tell people everyone is allowed an opinion, but you have to live your life with fact. So one of the opinions is this is only for low-paid workers. So to remove that opinion, we ran two pilots, one with highly paid workers and one with lowly paid workers. And the data was fascinating because it told us that both need access to earnings before the end of the month. However, the difference was when the high paid worker used his card, it was for £500. But when the low paid worker used the card, it was for £20, but actually they were both accessing it the last 10 days before pay. So the period, the data period was saying it's the last 10 days people are struggling in.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that the facts told us. Yeah. The second fact that told us was we also gave the low paid workers 100% access to their wages. And the reason we did this was for two things. One is we wanted to take away this opinion that if you give someone access, they're just going to go and spend it and have nothing left at the end of the month. The data said that's completely false. On £150,000 of pay that they had access to, they were accessing £3,000, which tells you people know how to budget themselves. You don't need to police them. And the second part of the data that we wanted to figure out, Josh, was how many of them would be using it to withdraw cash, because you can go to the ATM and draw cash out of the card. So we also gave them access to that. And what the data was saying is very seldom did people use the card to withdraw cash. They actually used the card to buy goods and services, right? So again, fact from the data. So for us, it was fascinating just to get to understand. One was every worker needs access and every pensioner needs access to their money when they need it. And two is people in almost all cases are financially responsible to look after themselves. You don't need to do it for them.
Yeah, and the only difference between the two was that I suppose the highly paid people were living according to their means, and the lowly paid people were living according to theirs, and the expenditure was simply scaled accordingly.
Exactly. I mean, I call that the law of common sense, but you know, the law of common sense says when someone's highly paid, they've got a bigger mortgage, their holidays are more expensive, and they've got an expensive car. When someone's lowly paid, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
But what the data's saying is actually both have cash flow issues in the last 10 days. Yeah. And really that's where they need the assistance, and that's where the assistance counted. I mean, you know, there's been two fascinating things as well, Josh, on the impact to the economy when you give people that access. And I think the best one that I spoke with Mastercard about was when I was in a Pizza Express one Saturday, just after COVID. There was no one in the restaurant. And I asked them, was this because of COVID? Because it was Saturday night, you know, the movies were next door, the place should have been rammed. And the response was, no, sir, this is the last Saturday before payday. It's always like this. So if you think about the impact you can have to the local supply community if you remove that barrier, right? And I've had the same from the franchisors of Papa John's, and they were explaining to me that their sales dropped 50% 10 days after payday. So 50% reduction in sales because of the way we allow people to access their money.
Really fascinating stuff. So just to tie things up, where do you think things will be in, say, 3, 4, 5 years' time, as far as you're concerned? You know, how will things have changed?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, you've got technology plays a fundamental role in that question that you just asked, because our lives are changing every day. You know, look at the way we use transportation today versus where we did 10 years ago. It's completely different, right? So if you come in and digitize earnings and pensions, you know, what would the future, you know, look like? What would the future products look like to attract your spend? Yeah, or maybe you would be offered a daily mortgage with 5 years off the term. Maybe you'd get 5% reduction from Vodafone if you paid your contract daily so that they've got no arrears. You know, maybe suppliers will be paying greater loyalty just to attract you in store to come and spend with them. Maybe you will impact the environment every time you spend money so you can see what your carbon footprint is and actually allow you for the first time ever to be proactive about it. I mean, all these different digital solutions are coming together to impact overall. And the one thing that is coming out as a theme that I see is ESG and the role that that's beginning to play with the pension funds and other matters where people are beginning to care about ESG because it's beginning to change consumer behavior and people are looking for what can we do to actively either report on ESG or, you know, do something about it. And again, with Mastercard and the priceless planet, you know, there's phenomenal data available that shows an end user what impact they're having to the environment every time they buy a cup of coffee. And imagine that data presenting itself saying, do you want to do something about that? So in the next 3 to 5 years, I see this convergence of what today is almost separate solutions coming into a more holistic solution. And people like Mastercard are really well presented, you know, and founded to deliver that in a global scale, you know, like to the market. So I see two things happening. I see products changing to attract how people are accessing and spending their money, and I see impact and environment coming into play with each stage that you go through.
Well, David Brown, founder and CEO of, I think, a transformational fintech Hi55. Thank you ever so much for sharing some really interesting views on what I think will be very impactful as we go forward. And it's great as well that, of course, you're collaborating with Mastercard in that respect. So all I need to do now is just thank you and thank everybody for watching. Hope you found this of interest. I'm sure, David, you're very happy to take inquiries direct from people who might want to talk to you about all the themes that you've been covering here. And if so, they can either reach out to me and I can put them in touch, or else I'm sure they can reach out to you directly via your website at this point in time. So thank you for watching, and speak to you next time on the next one of these interviews.
Thanks, Josh.